Well, hello and welcome to what is absolutely my first ever unboxing video. And if you know me, then you probably know that I'm not really an unboxing video kind of guy. In fact, I don't think I've ever watched one before. But I'm going to make an exception for what's in this box right here because this is now officially the most expensive tool in my woodshop. What is it, you might ask? Well, it's a brand new P3 laser cutter from XTool. And it's an 80-watt laser cutter, which is way more powerful than anything I've used so far. So we're going to take the time in this video to see what's inside of this box, how to assemble it, and then we're going to walk through a lot of the features that are in there. I'm going to get a little experience with it and share that experience with you. And it's important to note here that I am sponsored by nobody. So these opinions that you'll see here regarding this laser and the one I already have, they're my opinions and I don't mind sharing them. Let's take a look. Now, before we get that P3 laser out of its box and get it all set up here, I wanted to show you the basis of my comparison. This is the Glowforge Pro. It is the very first version of the Glowforge Pro, and I've been using it for about 1.5 years. The interesting thing is it's not even mine. A friend of mine bought this. He didn't really have room for it, and he asked if I could keep it in my shop. If I did, I got to use it as much as I like. I probably would have never considered a laser cutter as a woodshop tool if I hadn't gotten this basically for free. And now I find it an indispensable part of my woodshop. I do a lot of routering, and this thing right here, it makes all my router base plates and my templates for me. And I've even built a business off of that by making those router base plates and templates for others. Let me walk you through a little bit though of some of the things we need to do to upgrade this scenario so that we can support 2 lasers, because I'm not going to get rid of this one. I'm just going to add another one to my arsenal. The big change that I need to make in order to get ready for that laser to be set up, and it's going to go right here, is to change the ventilation around a little bit. Now, most of these hobbyist or small business lasers, they come with filters so that you could run them inside of your home if you wanted to, or inside of a shop building like this. In fact, I've got a filter right underneath me right now. And when I originally was using this laser cutter, I went into that filter. There's a couple problems with that though. One is it is noisy. Real problem is the fumes that come off it. The filter gets most of it, but not all of it. And it is just so much better to try and get all of the vent fumes that come out of the laser cutter as it's cutting to go outside of the room that you're staying in. And that's why I installed this system here. Now, I have mounted to this wall a 165 CFM vent fan here. Now, it is possible that this particular purchase put me on a government watch list somewhere, because these fans, I think, are originally designed for some in-home botany. But they work really well for Glowforges as well, and this is only a 29 decibel fan. I am going to upgrade that by putting a second fan next to it here that is a little bit bigger, a little bit more powerful, a little over 200 CFMs, and it will hook up into the new P3. So I'm going to get all of that ready, and then we'll start working on getting it out of the box. So if you're not familiar with it, this stuff is actual duct tape. The stuff we call duct tape, no good for ducks. It dries out, doesn't stick very well at all. I put this tape in where I don't have the clamps, and that just keeps the air from leaking. This isn't a super critical thing, but we'd like to get as many of the fumes out as we can. So let's talk about the setup here. This is the original fan. It used to be mounted right here. You can see the mounting bracket holes that were there before. It goes to the Glowforge, and it still does. The other one, both of them hook up into this Y, both fans, and they exit the building up above here. I've put in these spring-based dampers over each one so that the airflow can only travel in that direction. That means if this fan is blowing up, there won't be air that comes back around and pushes into the other laser cutter. All of that is hooked up into a central controller, powered over here, and you might have noticed that I built a cabinet for the purpose. I have something of a carpentry addiction problem, so I thought I might as well do that as I went. Everything's hooked up and ready to go now. I can actually run this Glowforge without any problem because of the damper, and we'll get the other laser cutter going in just a minute. I guess this is the sample material they give you. Remove all packaging material. Okay. At least 4 adults are required. Well, we'll see about that. Well, I've got this monster in place now. The packaging said you got to bring 4 adults, and that's good advice. But I had 2 adults and 2 teenagers. And we got this over here, and it is a beast. This is, if you compare this P3 to the Glowforge over here, it's like Pac-Man eating a pellet. It could just open up and consume the whole thing. And it is heavy. You could probably do it with 2 good-sized adults with some strength to them, but 4 was smart. Got it over on the table. The table is exactly the right size for it. The problem is the way that the table is supported. It's supported in the middle and not on the ends. And because of the weight, you can see that it wobbles around here a little bit. Fortunately, I happen to be a carpenter and I've got a lot of wood behind me. So I'm going to come up with a solution for that. But before I do that, I want to get it all opened up and see what's inside here so I can figure out how to hook things up. I can't tell what's in here because it's got this covering, whatever it is. Let's see what it does. Okay. That is a fan of some sort. There's definitely going to be some assembly required. Vent exhausting. The interesting thing about this is that the Glowforge actually has a 4-inch exhaust, whereas this huge P3 only does 3-inch. I'll have to adapt it somehow to get to my fans. Power cable and USB. A funnel. Probably coolant. And what is this box? Some more screws and a screwdriver. I guess that's to get the assembly done. I don't know what person would buy this and not own a screwdriver. Masking tape, a manual, and just some more brackets and hardware. The rest is just packing material. So I think my next step is to read through this stuff and figure out how it's supposed to get put together. So step 1 is to remove these little green items. There's one here, and there's one on the opposite side. Step 2 is to insert a key into this USB port. And if you're wondering where it is, it's inside the little toolbox in this little compartment. Step 3 is to make sure that the safety switch, the emergency off, is disengaged. And that's hard to show because it's back here and I can't fit the camera back there. But right around from the on-off switch is a regular safety switch that you just turn clockwise to make sure it's disengaged. The next step is to fill the radiator up. And in the manual, it looks pretty complicated. There's this big table and everything that's involved with it. But it's more simple than it actually seems. The first thing you want to do is take out the plug for the reservoir and use the funnel that they've provided so that we can fill it up. This came with the XTool, and this is antifreeze. They also say to use purified water in a mixture with the antifreeze. And if you're going to keep this tool in a place that's never going to drop below freezing, you don't even need to use the antifreeze. You can just use this purified water. Now, I happen to live about 5,000 feet above sea level, so I'm going to use a mixture. And the mixture is based on how cold it could possibly get. There's a table here that tells you how many milliliters of each solution to use to make the final solution, but it's a lot easier than that if you just look at this gauge here. The numbers might be hard to see on this label, but if you're standing right here, you'll be able to read it with no problem. If this laser is nice and level, there should be nothing in here, and as you fill up, you fill the antifreeze until you hit the target minimum temperature that you're aiming for. Since I'm thinking minus 20 degrees Celsius, I'm going to fill the antifreeze up until it hits the minus 20 degrees Celsius mark here, and then I'll just use water until it goes to the line between the green and the yellow. And now there are only 2 steps left before we actually hook the software up and we can start cutting. I'm going to do it in the order that they say. The first step is to plug it in and to turn it on for the first time. The light turned red, but I don't hear anything up here. The final step before going to the software is to hook up the exhaust port. And that's what we spent so much time over there putting the fans together for. It turns out it comes with one. I didn't actually know that until I opened it up and saw it inside. I'm not going to be using this though. It'll be a backup for me for later. It's a bit of a tight space, I'll admit that. But I do have it hooked up now. You can see that a 4-inch pipe, this is a dust collector pipe, but it'll work fine, comes down here and attaches to my 4-to-3 converter, which attaches to the tool that came with the P3 itself. Well, it's been a couple of days since I last recorded, and as you can probably see, things haven't gone as well as I would have liked. My suspicion when I turned the power on and I didn't hear anything and I didn't see anything light up turned out to be a good suspicion. There is a problem. And this leads me to a little bit of a point that I'd like to make, and the difference between a big multinational company like XTool and a smaller one that's based in America like Glowforge. My Glowforge worked great right out of the box, but like any mechanical system, it can have problems, and I have had to, maintain it and repair it from time to time. And that has also meant getting in contact with the customer support. When you do that with Glowforge, they usually turn it around in one business day, and they're pretty responsive and can get you the parts that you need pretty quickly. It's a different story with XTool. They have a customer support team, but it's definitely a call center where they don't know all the particulars, and they're just really trying to walk you through step by step whatever instruction manual they have. That's what I did when I talked to them originally, and that's how I ended up with this plate off in the back here, which gives us an opportunity to look inside, which is cool. But they weren't able to answer my questions. We had to wait until, I think, 2 days later before I actually got an engineering response from the company. And basically what they've told me is that when it's powered on, it goes into this emergency switch that's in the back here, which I talked about. And that emergency switch just isn't working. Whether it's on or off, no power is going through it. Now what they've told me is they'll send me a new emergency switch. I have no idea how long that's going to take, but it is a little weird that I get a brand new system and it's my responsibility to fix their problem. But that is what it is. I'll take this opportunity to show you what's inside here, and we'll see how long it takes to get things actually fixed. Let's start first with the parts that I hope are actually still working once the power actually comes on. What you can see over here is these 3 fans are powering the radiator. The panel came off in 2 pieces. The first piece was this square right here, which you can see right here. It had to come off first because some of the screws that actually attach the other panel were behind this panel. And this panel is here so that you can insert an automatic feeder that will take your material all the way through. Down here is the control for the tray. The tray lifts and lowers depending on the size of your material. And you can see that this little bit of coolant runs out over here, so you can take a look at the coolant itself by taking this side panel off if that's what you need to do. Okay, we're at the next day and I've got an update. The last email I got from XTool said that they updated the page which talks about how power works with the components that are inside of here. And it gave me instructions for how to take that emergency switch out. It now shows a little video, and it's really easy. You just take a little screwdriver like this. There's a little slot in the back. You push it up and it pops right off. When I did that, there's some buttons on the inside of that internal switch. And when I pressed them manually, I was able to get it to power on. So the component's okay. It just wasn't attached well. So I have reattached it and it's working again. Anyway, this is what I was expecting to hear when I turned it on last time. Fan spinning up. Radiator fan spinning up. And lights happening on the top. We're in a good shape now. I think I can put the back of it back together and I can start actually hooking it up to an account and start cutting. Well, even with the emergency stop switch issue figured out, I had a couple more questions for the support people. And it's been a little bit frustrating working with them because I basically have a 24-hour turnaround time on all of the emails that I'm doing with their elevated support team now. I do think I could probably cut things with the laser at this point. I've got their software installed, and there's this cable running from my laptop into the machine itself. I had to do that even just to set it up so that it would talk to my Wi-Fi network. That was actually not that hard. And it updated its firmware and all the things you would expect. But there are a couple of other little issues I've run into. The first is that this tray itself, it's a physical tray with little slats running across. And there's room for 27 slats to go in. But for some reason, mine was missing 5 slats on the left and 5 slats on the right. It wasn't filled in all the way. So I asked the support team about that. Why am I missing some of these? And they said, well, that's just how they do it. They don't send you all the slats. So keep that in mind. It's a really weird thing for me for them to cut corners on a $6,000 machine by not adding all of the slats across the trays. They say if you have a piece that big, you can just move some of the slats around. But personally, I'd rather just have my tray all full. But that is what it is. I'll work around that. The bigger issue I'm running into is that I want to be running this from my office, which is in the room just behind me here. And in order to do that, I need to connect to it through the network. Well, this one hooks up to the Wi-Fi, no problem. It says it's hooked up. But when I go to my computer, because my computer isn't on the Wi-Fi, it's plugged in with the Ethernet jack, they're having a very hard time communicating with each other. Apparently 2 machines on Wi-Fi can just find each other, but there's a process where you have to go find the IP address of this particular thing by plugging it in here, and then going over to the other computer and entering in that IP address where it tells you to, and it's just telling me it's not found. I have no idea how to fix that. This is what I'm going through back and forth with the support team right now. But like I say, every time I have a question, they come back with another one. And it's a 24-hour turnaround. It's been a couple more days now, and I have basically given up on XTool support. Turnaround time is the same, about 1 message a day, and they're really not pointing me to any new information. I've just kind of determined that my network setup is a little too complicated for their software. But I did get my own workaround to it, which is I grabbed some Wi-Fi antennas, stuck them on my desktop machine, and I connected to the Wi-Fi network, and it was able to find it just fine. So I've got the software now hooked up so I can start doing cutting and engraving. I'm going to do that right now. My very first test is something I've wanted to do for a long time. I'm going to actually engrave some food. Now they say lasers are just fine for food, but you really shouldn't mix a laser that's cutting non-food items with food items. And since this laser has done nothing so far, I figure now's my one and only chance. I'm going to take some sugar cookies and put the company logo on it. Well, there you go, a sugar cookie cut with the laser, engraved or scored with the laser, I guess. Best settings for a sugar cookie, because it's not in the defaults, 90% power, about 200 millimeters per second speed. Now let's test something that's a little more relevant. It's interesting. You can actually taste the parts that the laser touch. You get that burned kind of taste to it, which is interesting because nothing physical touches it. It's not bad though. For now though, let's move on to acrylic. This is what I cut mostly for my business. And I am interested to see how this works. When you buy acrylic, it has paper backing, at least the kind that I do, on both sides. But I typically peel it off because I do so much engraving that it's difficult to peel it off afterwards. There's just too many little pieces left over. And I'm interested to see just how this particular tool handles that, because it has a raising tray that will adjust to the thickness of the material that it finds inside of it. So is taking that paper off going to be a problem in terms of determining the thickness? Let's find out. Well, my first trials are complete, and I will say that the transparent top is no problem. In fact, if you look at the instructions, they say peel off the top. So they've obviously designed it for that. The speed is also much faster than what I'm used to. And I think my next test is going to be to take one of my more complicated designs that I sell quite frequently and compare the amount of total time and compare and compare the total amount of time it takes to cut that on this machine versus that one. Okay, so here's the update. I did go and make those templates I was talking about. This is my router circle cutting templates, and I sell quite a few of these on Etsy. The interesting thing about them is there's quite a lot of cutting, there's a lot of engraving and scoring, so it makes a pretty good test bed. In terms of the time, it takes 36 minutes to cut it on the Glowforge, and it takes 27 minutes to do it on the P3. That's a significant savings, and that's a great reason to have an upgrade like this in and of itself. But I went further than that. I tried a lot more cuts, and I got to learn how the machine works in a little bit more detail. I want to share with you not just all the positives, because that seems to be what most of the YouTube videos are focusing on, right now at least, but also to tell you some of the downsides, because there was a point in there that I seriously considered returning this machine. I couldn't figure out how some of the things worked. It was such a pain. I did get through it, and I think I've reversed myself once again, and I will stick with it. But you should know both the positives and the negatives of having a machine like this. So let me talk a little bit about how this works, what works well and what doesn't, and then I'll come back at the very end and give you kind of a final verdict. Now, as anyone who's been a laser cutting operator for any substantial amount of time will know, you have to be something of a mechanic in order to keep your machine running smoothly. And that means you need to know how it works. And I'd like to start with the camera. My point of reference is this Glowforge. It has a single camera that sits on top of the lid here, which means it can only take a picture of the working surface if that lid is closed. It also means that that camera is really close to the working surface, and it only has that one camera, so it has to do a software correction the further away it is from the center where that camera is placed. The P3 works in a much different way. The camera is actually right here on the lid facing that way, horizontally instead of straight down. That means in order to get a picture of the entire surface, the lid needs to be all the way up so that the camera, which is right here, is pointing down. There are reference marks all along the base of the surface that it will cut from, and the camera tries to detect those reference marks in order to do whatever software correction it needs to do. This bigger distance from the tray to the camera itself means that it's going to have a more accurate point of view, and having all those reference marks helps as well. The other cool thing about the placement of the camera here is that once you bring this back down again, you can actually get a field of view look of the cut that's happening. If you're not even here sitting with the machine, you can do it from your computer. It will be feeding the cut from the side view to your computer, and you can watch to see if anything's going wrong. There are some other cameras as well. In this corner of the machine, there is a wide angle camera that points down onto this field of view here, the working surface. It is also something that you can watch while the cut is being made. But more importantly, there are cameras built into the box that host the laser as well. Because of that, once you've taken the larger field of view picture, you can get a close-up view of the material that you're working with. Using the software, it will bring the laser to the point that you want to see, take a picture of it up close, and make a more refined picture on your software. Because of that, this setup with these 3 different cameras and the laser check for the depth, you get much more accurate placing, and it is a huge upgrade over what I've been working with so far. There is a drawback though to this setup with the camera being up here. It does mean that you have to take pictures with different physical states of the machine. So if your computer, which is controlling the operation of your laser cutter, is not right next to the laser cutter, which is my setup, it means that you have to run back and forth to open and close the machine for each one of the cuts, something I did not have to do with the Glowforge. Next, let's talk about the tray. Now, the most amazing feature about the tray is, of course, that it automatically raises and lowers to adapt to the thickness of your material. It also has an automated system where the wide-angle camera will detect approximately where your material is, and then the laser camera will come over, shoot its own little laser down to get that thickness very precisely, and get a very accurate measurement of that thickness. Now, my reference point with the Glowforge, which does not have a lifting tray at all, is that I could basically work with somewhere between a flat piece of paper type of surface up to about 3/8 of an inch. If I take the tray out, the honeycomb tray out, I then can work with something up to nearly 2 inches. This tray is different. That automatic system helps you in almost all materials that you use, with some exceptions. And the exceptions were probably my biggest frustration point in working with this machine. I told you in the beginning I work with clear acrylic quite often, and that I tested it with 1/4 inch acrylic. And I was amazed that it worked the first time because the laser shot right through it and seemed to get the right thickness. Well, it turns out I was more lucky than anything else. When I put a 3/8 inch material on top of here, and then I did the same thing, the laser came down and the air assist that comes with it actually hit the top of my material and started dragging it around as it was working. Now on the Glowforge, there is a button on the software that allows you to come in and manually pick where you want your focus to be. I figured it must have one over here on the software for the XTool as well. And it does, but it took me almost 3 hours to find it. It turns out that there are 2 settings inside of the software. One is for the software itself, the other is for the machine. And you can only get to the settings of the machine if you first open a project to be working on and have a connection to the machine. If you go to the settings for the device on that project page, then you will find a setting which says to disable the automatic mode for the lift sensor. Once I did do that, I was able to cut my material. And the way that I did that is that I put my clear material in with the surface peeled off of it, but I also put in a small piece that had the surface tape still onto it so that I could send the laser over to check the depth of that piece and it would get it correct. Once I did figure out how to work through the clumsy UI and get it to work in a manual mode, I did figure out how to cut through 3/8 of an inch acrylic that you see with these hearts here. It took me a few tries to dial in the settings just right, but it cuts through in a single pass, no problem. They say they can go up to 3/4 inch acrylic in a single pass. With the Glowforge at the smaller 40 wattage, you have to do at least 2 passes to cut through this material. One other drawback to the tray is these slats that come with it. Now I told you they don't give you all of the slats to cover the whole thing, and that is annoying. But really, these slats are just not appropriate for a lot of the types of jobs that you would want to do on a laser cutter. Now, if you're just engraving the top of material, no problem. It will keep that material flat for you, and the laser can go over it and do it. The problem when you're cutting, though, like I do, is I often cut little pieces out and they fall down. Well, there is a breadcrumb tray, they call it, at the bottom, and if you detach a couple of screws on the sides, you can pull that breadcrumb tray out here and pull out the material that drops. But the much more appropriate type of surface for this tray is the honeycomb tray like you have in the Glowforge. XTool says that they will be providing an additional sale that you can make and buy to replace these slats with a honeycomb tray. Now what about the mechanics of the laser itself? Well, the news here is almost entirely good. The additional power allows me to do a lot of things that I wasn't able to do previously on the smaller machine. In terms of accuracy of the cuts and the engraving, so far I have found it to be nearly flawless. The air assist on this particular machine, the P3, is also a pretty amazing upgrade over what I had with the Glowforge. Laser cutters in general work either with a small fan sitting behind the laser constantly blowing air across it in order to keep those flames down, or they come with an air compressor, usually one you hook up to the side of the machine, that feeds air in, and at the appropriate times it will blow across it using the compressed air. Well, I don't need an air compressor for the P3. It seems to have whatever it needs built into it already, and it provides puffs of air at the appropriate time to keep any sort of flame from springing up. The last thing to consider is the software. Both Glowforge and XTool are different than just about all of the other laser makers in that they provide their own software. Almost all the other laser cutters ask you to use an outside controlling software to send the codes over to the machine that they can then cut with. Most people use Lightburn. Glowforge and XTool have their own proprietary systems, and they do not work with any software other than their own. I have been frustrated with both of their software. For the Glowforge, in order for you to operate the machine, you have to be connected to the internet. That's how they communicate together. If your internet is down for any reason, there is no way for you to work with this machine. The XTool is not like that. You can plug directly into the machine, or you can connect to it through a local network that doesn't have any online support at all. Both of the software suites have rudimentary drawing systems in place. I don't recommend using either of them. What you really want to do is create a DXF or a SVG file and send it over to the software to do the cutting. In the case of the Glowforge, if you want to use any of those tools, you actually have to pay a monthly subscription. This gives you access both to drawing and putting in text, but also some of their AI image generation. With XTool, those tools are all free except for the AI image generation. You don't have to pay any monthly subscription, but they do have a point system where you can either buy points or earn them by doing things that they approve of. And then you can use their AI tools at a certain cost per use of the AI tool. I have found that the XTool software suite is probably overall a little harder to work with. When I import SVG files that I create elsewhere, they come in at a size that is not to the proper scale. They say on their website that they support 96 pixels per inch, which is the standard and which Glowforge supports. But every time I import a file, it comes in much bigger than that, and then I have to manually scale it in the software back to its appropriate size. In addition, it only supports 8 different color layers on the XTool software. With the Glowforge, if I made any change in the color whatsoever, it gave me a separate layer to work with, whether I wanted to cut, engrave, score, or whatever settings I wanted to use on that particular color, I could, and then I could change the order in which any of those things worked. On the XTool, it gives you 8 colors total. That means 8 layers total. For instance, I have diagrams that have purple and light gray in them, and they shove it both into the exact same color. And that is frustrating. It means I have to go back and redo a lot of the diagrams that work just fine on my Glowforge in order for them to work on the XTool. And of course, we've already talked about the difference in customer support, neither one of which is perfect, but boy, did I have a hard time with XTool. With all of those particulars in mind, it does beg the question, what is my final verdict for this particular machine? And let me start off by saying there are absolutely a ton of things that I can do with this machine and a lot of efficiencies that I can get that I just couldn't get off of the less expensive and less powerful Glowforge. So it is going to be a benefit to me. But if you're going to ask me what my overall impression is of this particular machine, I think it is a product that wasn't quite ready to ship to the public. And what do I mean by that? Well, I learned very early on that some of the parts fall off in shipping sometimes, and you're going to have to go in and manually fix them. There is no way for them to send a technician to you. So it would have been nice if they maybe had that down a little more closely. I found out from other people online that a lot of people have to do calibrations of the cameras after shipping because they don't work quite right. I learned that it has features built into its motherboard that are not supported on the machine. For instance, there is no Ethernet port even though the motherboard supports it. So even though I have a plug right there I could plug it into, the only way for me to connect is by Wi-Fi. And as I also learned, it doesn't support a lot of the more complex Wi-Fi setups and home internet routing setups that are actually fairly common in a lot of homes. In addition to that, the software is not super well documented. A lot of features are coming online, but it has a lot of bugs as well. It would have also been better if they had given me the option to have a honeycomb tray instead of the slats that came with it at the time of my purchase. A lot of the accessories that they have supported on the P2 still don't work with the P3. And overall, I think that if it were to be a more complete project, and they sold it to me at the price that I got it for, I would be a lot happier with it. It feels to me right now that I'm a little bit of a beta tester, and yet I've paid full price for the machine. That said, a beta project can still be something very useful to you, and this machine is going to be useful to me. I told you I considered maybe I should send it back in my 30-day period, but I can see the potential of it now that I've gotten through some of the bigger issues. So I will be keeping this on as a great new tool to my shop, and I'm sure it's going to expand the possibilities of the things that I can do with a laser cutter. I hope that if you're considering buying a laser, the information you got here will give you a good way to evaluate whether this particular tool is right for you. Thanks for watching. I do hope we see you on the next one where we get to put this and our other tools to use to build something amazing.